Hello. My name's David, and I used to think silence kept the peace. But the truth is, they used my silence to drain my mother's savings, to feed a man who called himself her husband, and who lived off 8 grand a month like he earned it. They called it help. I called it survival. But when I stopped the money, took my mother, and sold the penthouse out from under him, they didn't just fight back. They tried to destroy my name in public. Now ask yourself, what kind of family does that to their own? And why? Why did it take me this long to see what they really were? Let me tell you what power really looks like after the noise. I arrived at the penthouse a little after 6, the way I always did on weekdays. The sun was dropping behind the buildings, leaving the living room washed in that dim, expensive glow people pay extra for. I set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. They landed with a soft click. No one looked up to notice. Everyone was already in their usual places. My stepfather sat at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled like he'd had a long day running the world. My mother was near the kitchen counter, wiping an already clean surface, giving herself something to do. I took the chair closest to the window. It wasn't assigned. It just became mine over time. No one greeted me. No one asked about my day. There wasn't tension in the air exactly. It was something flatter than that. Absence. The kind that tells you this is how things work, and questioning it would only slow dinner down. I loosened my tie and listened. My stepfather was talking about the building's monthly expenses. HOA fees, maintenance, utilities. He spoke with confidence, the kind that comes from never being challenged. Numbers were tossed around like common knowledge, like facts everyone in the room had agreed on long ago. "We'll keep the same setup," he said. "No need to change what's working." I nodded once out of habit, though no one was looking at me. The money he was discussing came from my account. Every month. Automatically. I'd set it up years ago, back when it felt simpler to just handle things quietly. My role in these conversations was clear. I was the current, not the switch. My mother moved slowly as she brought out plates. She apologized for the food taking longer than expected. No one had complained. She apologized anyway. She always did, as if the house itself required it. When she leaned forward to set a glass near me, I noticed her watch. Silver band. Worn face. The second hand lagged slightly behind the minute. I'd seen it do that for years. Her watch was always 7 minutes behind. She once told me it didn't matter. Time moved the same either way. My stepfather didn't look at her when he spoke next. He was already moving on, already deciding. "We should send a thank you note to Mark," he said. "He's been incredibly helpful keeping everything afloat." Mark, my stepbrother, not present tonight, not contributing a dime. But his name landed cleanly in the room, accepted without question. Someone else was thanked for something I'd paid for. Again, I felt it then. Not anger. Something smaller, sharper. The kind of cut you don't react to because reacting would draw attention, and attention has never worked in your favor. I thought about correcting him. Just a sentence. Just a reminder. I even rehearsed it in my head. But the words stayed there. Keeping the peace has a way of disguising itself as maturity. I glanced at my mother. She avoided my eyes, focusing instead on straightening a stack of napkins that didn't need straightening. Her sleeve slipped slightly, revealing the watch again. 7 minutes slow. Still ticking. Dinner moved on. Conversation shifted. Plans were made. I stayed quiet, answering when spoken to, offering nothing extra. That was the agreement, even if no one had ever said it out loud. Afterward, I helped clear the table. My stepfather stood, satisfied, and disappeared into the study. The evening had gone exactly how he expected. I stepped into the elevator alone. As the doors closed, the silence pressed in differently. Heavier. Honest. That's when it hit me. Silence hadn't protected my mother. It hadn't earned me respect. It had only trained them to forget where everything came from. I still believed silence was cheaper than conflict. I was wrong, but I wouldn't understand why until the night everything finally crossed the line. I pulled into the restaurant parking lot about 10 minutes before the reservation. Traffic wasn't bad, for once. The sky had already gone deep blue, and the lights from the upscale Dallas buildings shimmered off my windshield like the city was dressed for a gala. I sat there a moment before getting out. Told myself tonight might be different. It was my stepfather's idea, a family dinner, private room, just a small celebration. He said it like it was a generous gesture. I wanted to believe it. I really did. I wanted to believe I'd walk into that room and feel something other than tolerated. Inside, the hostess led me past rows of quiet tables and soft music. She opened a door to a private room near the back. Everyone else was already there. I recognized the setup instantly. Long table, dim lighting, cloth napkins folded like origami. My mother was adjusting a centerpiece she hadn't picked. My stepbrother, Mark, laughed too loudly at something. His girlfriend sat beside him, barely glancing up. And at the head, in full control of the room without seeming to try, was my stepfather. He was telling a story, hands moving just enough, smile at the right times. The staff leaned in slightly. He was that kind of man in public. People wanted to like him. That charm was real. It just wasn't meant for me. "Hey," he said, glancing my way, as if I just arrived late to something that didn't quite involve me. "Evening." I nodded and took a step forward, expecting, maybe hoping, for a seat at the middle of the table, but a young server gestured toward the far end. "We've set you up right here, sir." It wasn't a bad seat, technically, just a little off-center, a little farther from the head of the table than anyone else. Not hostile, not insulting, just separate. I sat. No one blinked. Plates were passed, wine poured. Toasts were hinted at. Laughter rolled gently across the table like background music. I smiled when it made sense. I offered a few quiet comments, but the current didn't pull toward me. At some point, I realized they weren't calling this dinner anything. No birthday, no anniversary, just a night out with family. But everyone there knew it was about my stepfather closing a deal, one that indirectly involved me. I'd introduced him to the client last year. I'd reviewed the contract. I'd stayed late more than once to make sure it didn't fall through. But that part wasn't mentioned. Halfway through the evening, he stood, raised his glass. "I just want to say," he began, "how grateful I am to have this kind of support behind me. A lot of people don't have families like this." Murmurs of agreement. "I mean, look at what we've built. Together. Mark, your insights always push us forward. And Linda." He looked at my mother with warmth. "You keep us all grounded." He went on, nodding to his assistant, who was also invited. Thanked the team back at the office. Even complimented the chef. But not once did my name come up. The wine burned a little in my throat. My mother glanced at me then. Quick, almost unnoticeable. Her hand tightened around her glass, the way someone might brace against an invisible push. I followed her hand to her wrist. The watch was still 7 minutes behind. Still ticking. Still pretending time didn't matter. I sat there, trying to decide whether to speak. A few words would have been enough. Could have made a joke. Lightened the mood. Reminded everyone that I'd had a part in this too. But I didn't. I pictured the silence that would follow. The awkward glances. The way my stepfather would defuse it with some charm-filled dismissal. I pictured my mother's face tightening in apology, though she'd done nothing wrong. So I stayed seated. I told myself it wasn't worth it, that it was just one dinner, that I didn't need recognition in front of people who'd already made up their minds about me. But as the meal went on, I felt smaller. On the drive home, I kept the radio off. The quiet was louder that way. I thought about how many times this had happened. Different settings. Same feeling. Same results. One question wouldn't leave me alone. How many times does something have to happen before it's intentional? I didn't know it yet, but this dinner wasn't the insult. It was the warning. I didn't go back to the building that night looking for answers. I told myself I was only there to pick up a folder I'd left behind. Something small. Something practical. That's how I justified turning the car around after dinner, even though I was already halfway home. The garage was quiet when I pulled in. Late evening had settled into the place the way it always did, with soft lights and long shadows. I parked on my level, shut the engine off, and sat there for a moment longer than necessary. The silence felt different after the restaurant. Less performative, more honest. I took the service elevator up. It was faster and, more importantly, rarely used. Old habits. I didn't want to make an entrance. I never did. The hallway outside the penthouse was dim, just a low strip of light along the floor. I moved without thinking, keys in my hand, steps measured. The door ahead was closed, but not fully latched. A thin line of warm light cut through the frame. I slowed down. Voices drifted out, unguarded, relaxed, the kind people use when they believe they're alone. I stopped near the corner, close enough to hear but far enough to stay unseen. I hadn't planned to listen. I told myself that, but my body stayed still, as if it already knew something my mind hadn't accepted yet. My stepfather was speaking. His tone was easy, almost amused. "You can't let things get messy," he said. "That's how people start asking questions." Someone chuckled. Mark, I realized. His voice always carried that careless confidence, like consequences were for other people. "I know," Mark said. "But what about him?" There was a pause. Not a long one, just enough to matter. My stepfather exhaled, the sound light and dismissive. "He's fine. He likes feeling useful. As long as the check's clear, he won't rock the boat." They talked about money the way people talk about furniture. Something you move around as needed. Something that belongs to the room, not to the person who paid for it. "He won't do anything," my stepfather added. Not harshly, not cruelly, just stating a fact the way you might comment on the weather. "He never does." The words landed without noise, without drama, and somehow that made them worse. I felt my chest tighten, not with anger, but with recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't carelessness. It was a plan that had been working for a long time. They kept talking. Logistics, assumptions, jokes that weren't meant for my ears. I stopped listening to the details. They blurred together, replaced by a strange clarity. I shifted my weight and glanced into the room through the narrow opening. My mother wasn't there. The chair she'd been sitting in earlier was empty. On the table beside it rested her watch. The silver band caught the light. The face was angled toward the ceiling. I didn't need to see it closely to know it was still off. 7 minutes behind. Always behind. She must have taken it off to wash her hands. Or maybe her wrist had been aching again. Small things. Ordinary reasons. But seeing it there, separate from her, hit harder than anything they'd said. I didn't feel the surge of anger I'd always imagined would come in a moment like this. No shaking hands. No rush of blood. What replaced it was colder. Quieter. Like a door closing somewhere inside me. I stopped hearing excuses. I stopped searching for context. Instead, I started noticing patterns. Who spoke first? Who laughed? Who decided? Who assumed? I replayed past dinners, past conversations, moments I'd brushed off because it was easier that way. Each one slid into place with uncomfortable precision. This wasn't personal to them. It was practical. I took a step back, careful not to make a sound. My keys were still in my hand. I wrapped my fingers around them, grounding myself in the weight, the edges. I could have walked in, could have stood there and let the room fall silent. I knew exactly what would happen if I did. Apologies that didn't mean anything. Smiles stretched thin. My mother caught in the middle, trying to soften the damage. So I didn't. I turned toward the service corridor instead, moving the way I always had. Quiet, unobtrusive, easy to overlook. The elevator doors closed without a sound. As they descended, I stared at my reflection in the metal wall and barely recognized the man looking back. I wasn't angry. I was done being confused. That was the moment I stopped asking why, and started asking how long this had really been going on. I didn't turn on any lights when I got home. The house felt too sterile for comfort, too curated. I walked in quietly, dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, and went straight to my office at the back of the house. The one room I still felt belonged only to me. I sat down, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen as it glowed to life. The clock in the corner blinked 11:47 p.m. outside. The neighborhood had already gone still. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel much of anything. Instead of replaying what I'd heard that night emotionally, I started replaying it structurally, like a bad deal being reviewed clause by clause. Certain phrases stuck. He won't do anything, as long as the check's clear. The way they said it, like I was dependable in the same way electricity or water is, quiet, automatic, invisible. I opened my email. Nothing urgent. A few newsletters, some junk, a message from the property manager about recycling schedules. But I wasn't looking for something obvious. I was looking for what had always been there, hiding in plain sight. I switched over to my bank portal. My fingers moved without hesitation. I'd done this 100 times before, mostly for bookkeeping. Rent transfers, HOA dues, utility auto payments. Everything had its place. Everything looked clean. But this time I scrolled slower. Monthly withdrawals to D&M household account. Consistent amounts. Repeating dates. No alerts ever flagged them because I had set them up myself. Years ago. Back when it felt like I was helping. Supporting. I clicked through archived statements, backtracking quarter by quarter. The numbers didn't change. What changed was how I saw them. There was no shared account with my name on it. No joint management. Just me funding a system I wasn't allowed to question. Every time there had been a family need, I'd contributed. Quietly, sometimes even proudly. New furniture for the condo. Private school tuition for Mark's daughter. My stepfather's surprise birthday trip to Santa Fe. I remembered writing those checks, not being asked, being told. And I never asked for receipts, because I trusted. I was starting to realize trust had been my most expensive mistake. I kept digging. Year after year, the pattern repeated. Whenever tensions were high, a gift or gesture would follow. And every one of those dinners, vacations, even hospital bills, had somehow been drawn from my funds. Not theirs, mine. And the strangest part? I hadn't even noticed. It wasn't theft. Not technically. I had given access. Approved transfers. My name authorized the payments. But what I saw now was how each approval had followed a moment of silence. A swallowed complaint. A time I had stepped back instead of stepping in. My compliance had been bought. Over and over. I scrolled through my documents, opened folders I hadn't touched in months. I searched for contracts, emails, anything with language that acknowledged me, my support, my input, my role. Nothing. Not one thank you. Not even a passing mention in a group email. Mark had signed off every family update with "we've got it handled," or "Dad's taking care of things." Dad. Not me. I leaned back in my chair. The watch came to mind again. My mother's watch. Always late. Always behind. Just like the stories she told herself to keep peace. She used to say, "It's just easier this way." About dinner plans. About who sat where. About what we didn't bring up at the table. And, apparently, about whose money funded what. I clicked out of the bank portal and opened a spreadsheet. Not for revenge. Not for drama. For clarity. I started logging. Dates. Amounts. Who requested what, even indirectly. When it happened. What else was going on that same week. Patterns started forming. Spikes in spending aligned with moments I'd been excluded. The weeks after my mother forgot to tell me about family events. The months when I'd pulled away emotionally, only to be reeled back in with a surprise need. It wasn't random. This was a structure, and I'd helped build it. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to understand anger. No yelling, no pacing, just a focused, sharp awareness. A sense that a current had shifted somewhere under my feet and now I could finally feel the direction it was pulling. I looked at the clock. It was almost 3 a.m. I saved the spreadsheet, backed it up. I opened a new folder, labeled it with the date, and started dragging in documents, screenshots, statements. Anything that fit. Anything I'd need to look at twice. Not for confrontation, for preparation. The game had changed, and I was finally playing it on purpose. This system, their system, had only worked because I allowed it. Because I wanted to believe I was doing good by keeping the peace. But peace built on silence is a house made of paper. I shut the laptop slowly. The screen faded to black. Once I saw the full pattern, there was only one question left. What would happen when I stopped feeding it? The decision had been made hours ago, but it was now, while the sun hadn't yet claimed the sky, and the house was still wrapped in silence, that my hand moved. I didn't hesitate. Hesitation was the currency they'd traded in for years, mine, not theirs. Every time I paused, they profited. Every time I gave the benefit of the doubt, they took just a little more. I logged into the banking portal just as I had the night before. But this time I wasn't looking, I was acting. There it was. The familiar $8,000 monthly transfer. For years, it had moved on the first without fanfare. A quiet deposit into the shared household account my stepfather managed on behalf of the family. No breakdown, no oversight, just trust. And trust had built the cage. I hovered over the transaction. It would run again in less than 4 hours. Click. Cancel recurring transfer. A confirmation box popped up. My finger paused for a beat longer than I'd planned. Not because I doubted, but because I knew once this was done, nothing would look the same again. I clicked confirm. Felt small. No sirens. No weight lifting from my shoulders. Just a screen that said, success. Recurring payment canceled. I closed the laptop, but I didn't get up. I sat still, elbows resting on the desk, hands folded like I was waiting for a verdict. $8,000 shouldn't have meant much to a man my age with my earnings. But it wasn't the amount, it was the symbol. That money had been a leash dressed as generosity. And now it was gone. I imagined how the morning would unfold across town. My mother sipping coffee in the kitchen, maybe setting out 2 mugs. My stepfather checking his phone between bites of toast, expecting his usual notification. Confident, comfortable, unbothered, until he realized. I rubbed my palms together slowly, like I was trying to warm them, or maybe ground myself. Then came the guilt. It didn't scream, it whispered. Quiet images that rose up uninvited. My mother's voice. He means well. He doesn't say things the way you do. Her eyes always scanning for tension before it rose. Her way of defending him by not naming what he did. Was she going to think this was about punishing her? About abandoning her? Because it wasn't. But it would feel like that to her. And that was the hardest part. She would be confused before she understood. She might even call it betrayal. And maybe in her world it was. But in mine, this was oxygen. I stood and walked to the kitchen. The coffee pot was empty, but I wasn't ready to make more. I leaned on the counter, the stone cool against my palms. Her watch flashed in my memory again. The soft glint of the gold face, always a few minutes behind. Always behind. Always catching up. Just like her. Always adjusting, always making room, always justifying silence. And she taught me how to do the same. Not through instruction, but through example. This isn't about revenge, I said aloud to no one. This is about protection. It sounded firmer when spoken. I turned, walked back to the office, and reopened the laptop. This time, I didn't go to the bank. I opened a private folder I had labeled just last night. Clarity. Inside were the spreadsheets, the emails, the timelines. Facts, not feelings. I reviewed them one more time, not to reconsider, but to reinforce. Then I opened another tab and initiated a new transfer. Smaller. Personal. To an account in my mother's name only. An account I had opened months ago in case of emergency. She didn't know it existed yet. She would. When the time was right. I couldn't control how she'd interpret this move. But I could make sure she wasn't caught in the crossfire of my refusal to stay complicit. Support didn't mean submission. Not anymore. The sun had started to rise. Light crept across the edge of the blinds, soft and unbothered. The house began to hum with distant life. Cars on the road, sprinklers switching on. Then my phone lit up. No ringtone, just the screen glowing against the table. Missed call Mark. A few seconds later, missed call Mark 2. Missed call home line. No voicemails, no texts, just the growing tally of attempts. I let the phone sit, let it vibrate again and again. I didn't need to answer. They'd figured it out. I closed the laptop and placed it gently on the table. I stood, stretched my back, and exhaled fully for the first time that morning. The wire was cut. Whatever came next was no longer theoretical. By noon, they realized the money was gone. And that's when the tone changed. By noon, they realized the money was gone. And that's when the tone changed. The phone rang again. Then again. Same number. Same silence afterward. I didn't pick up at first. I wasn't avoiding. I just wanted to hear what they'd say when I didn't answer. I wanted to see if they'd call back out of concern or control. The third call came from my mother's line, but I didn't believe for a second it was her holding the phone. I waited until the fifth ring, then finally picked up. "Yeah," I said, flat. Mark didn't say hi. He didn't ask if I was okay. He went straight to it. "The account bounced. You cancel the transfer." No emotion. No preface. Like it was a clerical error I needed to clean up. I said nothing. "You did, right?" he pressed. "Because otherwise there's a problem with the bank." Still nothing in his tone. Not worry. Not curiosity. Just pressure dressed up as assumption. "You're not answering," he said, this time sharper. "Look, we've got payments lined up this week. People we've already told are covered. You know that." "I know," I said simply. "Then what the hell's going on?" That was the first flicker of heat. Not concern, indignation. I took the call outside, pacing near the edge of the parking structure. The air was warm, sunlight bouncing off concrete, and I kept my voice even. "I canceled the transfer." A pause. "You canceled it?" He laughed, like he'd misheard me. "Yes." A longer pause this time. Then came the real voice, the one he used when things didn't go his way. "That money's not optional." We agreed. "No." I cut in. "You decided." I just stopped objecting. He scoffed. "Come on, don't rewrite history now. You've always handled this stuff. You know how it works." Handled. Not contributed. Not supported. Handled like I was just the admin behind the curtain. And there it was. The reframing. The old script. He kept going. "You were always better at the numbers. You kept the peace." It made sense. Made sense for him. I leaned against the concrete pillar, looking down at the lot below. Quiet cars, some still running with drivers inside. Everyone waiting for someone. He said my name again, this time more deliberate. "You know this doesn't just affect you, right?" "It was never supposed to," I said. "But it did. And it does. And now it stops." He was silent. Not because he understood, but because he was recalibrating. Then, low and flat, "Is this about your mother?" Another long breath from me. "She's not the problem. But she's not the reason I'm staying quiet anymore either." "Jesus. You're really doing this, huh?" He laughed again, but it was shorter this time. Harder. "You think you're the only one who's sacrificed?" "I don't think that word means what you want it to." I kept my eyes on the horizon. A woman walked past, glancing briefly at my face. I must have looked calm, but tense. Like someone trying not to explode. "I'll give you one chance to fix this before I have to get other people involved," he said. There it was. The threat. Not direct. Not spelled out. Just hung there, implied. I straightened up. "Is that what you're doing now? Calling it in?" "No. I'm saying there are legal implications when money goes missing." "Nothing's missing." I just stopped giving it. Another pause. "Look, you're being dramatic," he said, trying to reel it back. "We can talk about it. But not like this. Not with ultimatums." "This isn't an ultimatum," I said. "It's a decision." I could feel the weight shifting. He wasn't used to this version of me. Concise, composed, unwilling to entertain the spin. He kept talking, but I stopped absorbing the words. The rest was noise. I thought of my mother. How she always waited for the storm to pass instead of stepping out of it. How she adjusted the watch not because it would fix the time, but because it gave her something to do. That wasn't going to be me anymore. I didn't hang up. I just let the call end naturally with nothing resolved. He would keep trying, but not like before. This time I wasn't in the room he thought I was in. Later that afternoon, the tone did shift again. I got an email. Short, formal. It used phrases like financial clarity and documented obligations. Suddenly, I was no longer family, I was a point of liability. I read it twice calmly, and that's when it clicked. This had never been about misunderstanding. It was about control, power, access. They didn't fear losing me. They feared losing what I gave them. And now they were. When they realized pressure wouldn't move me, they chose something far uglier. When they realized pressure wouldn't move me, they chose something far uglier. It didn't come in the form of shouting or lawsuits or doors slammed. It came in the form of whispers, tilted heads, half smiles that didn't reach the eyes. 2 days had passed since the last call. I was downtown, walking back into the lobby of the building where my firm leased a floor. It was a typical weekday afternoon. Meetings, emails, a coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until I stepped into the elevator and caught the tail end of a conversation that stopped just a moment too late. I mean, I'm just saying if it's true. Then silence. The kind that tries to pretend it didn't just speak. I turned slightly. 2 people I recognized from legal across the hall. They smiled. One gave a small, forced chuckle. The door closed. We rode to 12 in silence. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. By the time I reached my office, there was a tightness in my chest. Not panic, just pressure. Something had shifted. Something I hadn't authorized. Later that afternoon, I found out what it was. I was finishing a project meeting when Liz, one of the project coordinators, lingered a little too long after everyone had filed out. She hovered near my desk, notebook clutched tighter than necessary. She cleared her throat. Hey, just a quick question. Totally off topic. Someone mentioned something earlier, and I wasn't sure if I should bring it up. I waited, calm, still. It's probably nothing. Just, someone said you were being audited? Like financially? I figured it was just a rumor, but people are talking. Audited. I hadn't heard that word in years. And no, I wasn't. But now I understood. They weren't going to come at me with lawyers. They were going to come at me with stories. With innuendo. The kind that spreads faster than truth and never really gets cleaned up after. I thanked Liz, told her it wasn't true, smiled like it didn't land. But inside, I felt the shift, clean, sharp, unmistakable. The gloves were off. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't storm into anyone's office. I sat quietly in mine and opened a blank document. Not for a response. For tracking. I began listing names, times, locations, any detail I could remember. I traced the threads. It didn't take long. Mark's brother had connections in finance. They'd once shared a summer job at a mid-sized bank in Arlington. One of the guys from that office now worked on compliance consulting. Someone else still ran in the same golf circles. It didn't have to be true. It just had to sound plausible. And that's what made it dangerous. Because it did sound plausible. To someone who didn't know the family, didn't know the context, didn't know that I'd been the one funding everything for years, they'd believe it. They'd think, oh, maybe he moved money around too much. Maybe something shady happened. And the worst part? I trained people to see me as the one who never explained. The one who fixed things quietly. The one who didn't push back. That silence, once my refuge, was now being used as ammunition. I stared at the spreadsheet I'd built, with names and assumptions and paths of rumor, and felt a flash of something bitter crawl up my throat. But I didn't let it out. Instead, I did the opposite of what they expected. I didn't call anyone. I didn't deny anything. I let the silence stretch, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was choice. They wanted me to defend myself, to panic, to scramble to prove I wasn't what they were saying. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I went home that evening later than usual. Traffic was slow, the skyline of Dallas turning golden in the falling sun. I parked in the garage, stayed in the car for a moment longer than I needed to. Then, without turning off the engine, I thought of my mother, of the watch, always behind, always patient. But even patience has a finish line. I stepped out, headed inside. No calls that night. No emails. Just silence again, but a different kind. Heavier now. A silence waiting to be broken. But not by me. They'd crossed a line. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about who got to tell the story of me. And that changed everything. They thought the story would end with me defending myself. Instead, I let them finish telling it. I didn't try to stop them. That was the hardest part, learning to sit still while they talked. While the rumors moved like smoke under doors, curling into places I hadn't thought to seal. I waited, let it breathe, let it fester just long enough for the people around me to stop asking questions and start forming quiet opinions. And then, just when they believed they had me pinned, a statement appeared. Came through the back channels first. Screenshots passed around in text threads. Whispers in professional circles that shared just enough to keep the smoke thick, but not enough to reveal the fire was staged. It was carefully written, polished. I could tell they'd hired someone. After years of financial mismanagement, we regret to share that certain family assets were withheld, redirected, and concealed. No names, no direct claims. But it was clear who they were talking about. Me. The rest of the paragraph was padded with legal language. Nothing provable, nothing solid, just implication dressed in caution. It reeked of desperation, but not enough for anyone outside the story to notice. And that was the point. They didn't need it to be true. They just needed it to be believable. I sat with it, read the lines twice, then once more. My attorney, Marcus, called 20 minutes later. "I've seen it," he said before I could even say hello. I didn't ask what he thought. I didn't need his opinion. I needed his plan. "It's thin," he continued, calm as ever. "But they're baiting you. They want you to respond emotionally, to come out swinging. I won't. I know. That's why we're going to win." That afternoon, Marcus sent out a formal reply on my behalf. No adjectives, no outrage, just data. Ownership records, payment logs, legal transfers, all properly archived, time-stamped, and notarized. The truth didn't come in waves. Came in paper. Came in PDFs, in scanned forms, in digital signatures. No drama. No spin. We released the facts like cold water. And facts don't argue. They confirm. They realign. They end rumors by starving them. In the next 24 hours, their story began to unravel. Not because I fought it, but because I let it sit next to the truth, and the contrast did all the work for me. By the second morning, silence began returning, one person at a time. A message unsent. A meeting where nobody brought it up. Colleagues who suddenly remembered how to make eye contact. They didn't apologize. They never do. And that was fine. I wasn't doing this for apologies. I was doing this to reclaim something they had taken without asking, my name. That evening, after everything had settled, I sat alone at the edge of my dining room table. The same table where so many so-called family conversations had happened. Ones I hadn't questioned. Ones I'd paid for. I opened a drawer and took out the old watch. Her watch. It was still running, slow as ever. A few minutes behind like it always was. But not this time. Now, it matched the time on my phone exactly. I don't know why that struck me the way it did. Maybe it was just coincidence. Or maybe time had finally caught up to all of us. I didn't feel triumph. No swell of justice. Just space. Clearing. Later that week, I passed by Mark's name in my call log. Still unanswered from the last attempt. He hadn't tried again since the release. Neither had anyone else. They weren't confused. They were cornered. And people don't call when the story flips. I didn't need them to. I didn't need closure or confession. I didn't need their version of peace. Because what I'd reclaimed wasn't just clarity. It was the ability to stand without needing their permission. The version of me that kept everything glued together quietly, who turned the other cheek, who wrote checks to keep the peace. That version didn't exist anymore. And they knew it. Not because I told them, but because I'd stopped lying for them. I thought that would be the end. But power doesn't disappear quietly when it... I thought that would be the end. But power doesn't disappear quietly when it's taken away. It resists. Not with rage, but with whispers. With cold stares from people who used to hug you too tightly. With silence that hums louder than accusation. But eventually, it fades. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic apology, no truth-telling dinner where everyone sat around a table and said what they should have said years ago. Just absence. No one called. No one showed up at my door. No one posted anything more. The emails stopped. The passive-aggressive voicemails dried up. Their silence, once a weapon, had become their retreat. Several weeks passed like that, quiet, almost suspiciously so. I used to think resolution would feel louder, that it would involve standing tall in front of them, maybe getting the last word. But peace didn't come from anything that theatrical. It came from moving. I left the penthouse a week after the facts were made public. I didn't throw a going-away party. I packed in the early mornings, when the city was still half asleep and the noise of it all couldn't touch me. The furniture? Sold. The artwork? Donated. The things that weren't mine to begin with? I didn't bring them. I kept a few items. My books, my mother's old dishes, a couple of framed photos that still meant something. Everything else stayed behind like shedding a skin. The new place isn't far. Maybe 40 minutes outside Dallas. A simple one-story house with a quiet backyard and neighbors who wave but don't ask questions. The first night there, I sat on the porch with a glass of water and let the stillness stretch. There were no echoes, just space. A few days later, I brought my mother. Not with fanfare. Not as some grand act of rescue. Just a change of address. She didn't ask where we were going. She only asked if I'd be staying, too. When I nodded, she looked at the road ahead and exhaled, like her body had been holding that breath for decades. We arrived late morning. I carried in her small suitcase. She'd insisted on packing light, like she was just visiting. But I made sure she saw the bedroom already set up for her, with the quilt she liked folded neatly at the end of the bed. No ceremony, no big reveal, just readiness. She didn't say much that first afternoon. We sat in the kitchen. She drank tea. I cleaned out a drawer. And then, while I was reaching for a box of matches tucked in the back, I saw it. Her watch. Same gold band. Same tiny crack along the edge of the glass. But this time, when I picked it up, the time was right. She must have adjusted it. It struck me quietly how much of our lives had been defined by things being almost on time, almost addressed, almost confronted, always a few minutes off. But now, even her watch wasn't waiting anymore. She wore it the next day. No comment. Just slipped it on like she'd been doing it every day. And when she glanced at it over breakfast, I noticed she didn't tap it or shake it like she used to. She trusted it. I trusted it, too. Not everything healed. I didn't expect it to. There are still names in my phone I'll never dial again. People I used to share holidays with who now exist only in old family albums and mutual avoidance. Some of them never reached out after the truth surfaced. Others sent short, clipped messages with no real ownership. It's been a tough time for all of us. I just hope you're doing what's best. You know how families get. I didn't respond. Not because I'm bitter. Not because I'm punishing them. But because chasing closure from people who refuse to admit what they've done is its own form of pain. And I'm done chasing pain. Power, I've learned, isn't about control. It's not about winning the argument or forcing someone to see what they've tried not to. It's not even about being proven right. It's about choice. The power to leave without asking for permission. The power to stay silent without being silenced. The power to reclaim your name without needing them to say it back to you. That's what this house represents to me. Not victory. Not revenge. Just release. Some nights I still think about the versions of me that kept trying. The one who paid to keep peace. The one who waited for the story to change on its own. The one who believed that loyalty and silence were the same thing. He tried. He did what he knew how to do. But I don't owe him anything either. Not guilt. Not regret. Just acknowledgement. And maybe a little grace. As for my mother, she reads more now. Sometimes she hums. She still doesn't talk much about what happened. And I don't ask. Not because we're avoiding it, but because we don't need it to be said out loud anymore. She's here. I'm here. That's enough. Sometimes I catch her sitting out back, watching the trees move. She wears her watch still set correctly, still ticking. And I think this is what power looks like after the noise. Not louder, just cleaner. If you're still quiet to keep the peace, ask yourself who benefits from that silence. Because if it's not you, it's probably not peace. I didn't take everything. I took what mattered, and I didn't look back.